Hi, and welcome to the Aspire Europe Stakeholder and Communications Principles course. This video is a companion to the main e-learning course, provides an overview of some of the key concepts and helps you get on your way with the material. So, why do we need stakeholders and why are they so critical? Well, there's been research by the National Audit Office in the UK that suggested the single cause of failure is the perception of stakeholders. We can worry about time, cost and quality, but stakeholder resistance and stakeholders' perspective of whether you've been a success or not is critically important. So if we look at some examples in the UK, Wembley Stadium a few years ago ran massively over budget, ran late, missed the FA Cup final, but now the nation's proud of the stadium. So things in retrospect can look better than they are during delivery. So, as I was saying, there are common causes of failure. People are the difference between success and failure, and that's really about seeing your internal team as stakeholders. Because if they're not fully motivated and not telling the world what a great program and project you're running, then they in effect can create an anticipation of failure. Good communications reduces resistance, increases collaboration, risks is linked to stakeholder resistance, and benefits. Stakeholders are great at spotting things they can do with new facilities that you as a program and project team may not have thought of. So we've got a 5-step model that we use for stakeholder engagement. And just to clarify that term, we've got stakeholder management, which is the overarching process. But then there's the process of engaging with groups of people, which is targeted. So what we want to do is make sure we're all talking the same language, we're on the same page, and we approach it in a systematic way. So first thing we need to do is identify who the stakeholders are. We can do this by looking at track record, just looking at around the governance model, look around the organisation. Who are they? And then what we want to know is what are they interested in? What do we need to talk to them about? What do we need to communicate with them about, if anything, because they may not actually be interested. We also want to know if they're supporting us or against us. Then we can plan our engagement, we can plan our communications, we can put the systems in place, portals, websites, whatever we actually need, because that's the tools that we're going to need to use. And then we engage them. Yeah? We use our tools and our channels to communicate, and very importantly, deal with their feedback, because it's not one way, it's two-way for effective communications. And finally, we review how effective we are to make sure that the systems and processes are working and we're achieving our objectives. There are 3 basic sets of information that we need. We need our stakeholder management strategy, which sets out our approach, our responsibilities, the tools and systems that we're going to use, where and when and how we will use those systems. Then we have our stakeholder profiles. They normally start with the tool called a stakeholder map. This contains the details about their attitudes, the likelihood of them supporting us, the areas that they're interested in. So big groups of stakeholders may have complex needs, and we need to we put those in what we call our profiles. And then there's the communications plan itself, actually communicating with them on a regular basis and who does it and when. Okay, so step 1, who are they? Well, there's quite a useful little acronym called GUPPI, which stands for Governance, Users, Influencers and Providers. Not actually in the GUPPI order on the slide, as you can see. So basically governance, who are the people that are going to be making decisions? Who do we need to get on board to get decisions made? Who could get in our way? Users of the system or whatever it is we're creating, people who are going to be affected by it in their daily lives. And then the influencers, the people around the outside. Maybe they're subject matter experts. Maybe they're YouTubers, whatever it is that they do. How do they influence us and how do we influence them? Press being a big one if you're in certain industries. And then there's providers, the supply chain, the people that, if you're making changes, may change their contracts. We need to engage them. So that's your starting point, is the GUPPI headings. right? So that's how we find them. That's the starting point. But by speaking to them, they may point us in the direction of other people that can either help us or need to know. We then need to classify them. We need to think about them in terms of whether they're in the guppy headings, whether they're supporters, whether they're against us. How do we do that? We need to think about that. Now, segmentation is one of the ways that a marketing would use, and we've got to remember that basically what we're doing is marketing, because we're going to be marketing the messages of the program or project. So segmenting them, because people could be in more than one grouping. Yeah, an individual could be down as a member of staff, yeah, which gives them the influence of a single member of staff, but they might be in a trade union, which gives them a lot more influence. They may be in part of pressure groups or that sort of stuff. The other thing we need to be aware of is soft relationships between stakeholders. Who do they know? Who do they work with? Who do they go to football matches with? Who do they go to the pub with? Some of that stuff can be really effective in actually understanding who they are and what they might be able to do for, with, or against us. So another one is when we're putting together what we call the stakeholder map, which is a two-dimensional model which shows all the stakeholders and their areas of interest. Quite often project teams have a very limited view on what the areas of interest are. Yeah, it might be requirements or some, maybe 4 or 5 things, but there's a huge amount of areas they could be interested. They could be interested in the outcomes and the end games. They could be looking at risks. They could be looking at why the program's happening, drivers for change. They might be concerned about the financial position if they're in the accountant's area. They might be interested in business performance rating. Are we improving? Is the program or project causing problems? Is it affecting supply chain? Is it affecting customer perceptions? Is it affecting sales? They'll be interested in the benefits. And don't forget, when we're talking about benefits, there's winners and losers. So are they winners or are they going to be losers? And then we can look at the project. They might be interested in the project process. Is it happening on time? Is it running late? Does it affect them? And of course, most of all, staff changes and restructuring. They all want to know about that. If it affects them, it might affect their friends. So these are the kind of areas that people might be interested in. So when we're analysing stakeholders, some things that we need to think about. Firstly, we need to know, are they interested or not? Because just because we want them to be interested, they may actually not find it very interesting at all. And in that scenario, we may need to put our comms plan together to actually gain their level of interest. We need to know their level of influence. We need to know, are they advocates or adversaries? Are they on our side or are they not on our side? And then we can think about how we group them together. So HR segment employees into different groups, don't they? They'll group them in silos, in departments, and they group them by bandings and levels in a layer. We may need to use the same thing. How does marketing group their customers? Are there any ways of looking at that? Or corporate comms, if not marketing? And even procurement will be grouping their suppliers together, probably by spend. They might have primes, they might have second tier, all that sort of stuff. We need to come up with a plan. Now, you probably wouldn't have to do all these things, but it's certainly things that you should be considering at the outset. Some further analysis, something I mentioned a little earlier, about interactions between stakeholders, between the stakeholders. Are their interest areas changing or raising, or are they losing interest? We've got to be able to track all this stuff, which is the role of the stakeholder profile. But initially, I recommend you use the stakeholder map, which is covered in the course. How active are they? Are they kind of against you, but pretty benign, so they're not that fussed? Okay, so there's different ways you need to see these people. Thinking about power mapping, interfaces, which groups are influencing who, assessing that overall impact. Their overall impact is their influence times interest, but they also have this level of attitude to take. Are they for or against is probably as important, because one person of low interest but high influence is against you could be a real problem if the forces that are opposing your program and project were to actually activate them. And then you need to think about how you can validate this analysis as well. Be careful that it's not your own biases and opinion that's forming it. When you've completed your analysis, you can think about putting together your stakeholder strategy. So, things we need to think about: the scope of the engagements that you need to deliver, the results of your stakeholder analysis. Have you got a big army of people who are in favour of your program or project, or are they all opposing it? You can populate your stakeholder profile, but you need to decide what you're going to track. And of course, you've got GDPR things to think about, because there might be some sensitivities about the comments you're going to make about stakeholders. Your approach to stakeholder management, the engagement process, which is kind of how you're going to do communications, how you're going to handle feedback, how you're going to track things, which channels you're going to use, and also how you're going to measure your own effectiveness when you are finished. Step 3, planning your engagements, is obviously something you need to really think about, because if you go in with a wrong attitude or take the wrong angle, you can create adversaries when they might have been advocates. So planning all engagements is absolutely essential. So we've got to think about, who are we contacting and why? What is it we want to achieve from this engagement? Who's going to be impacted? Have we got them all covered? And how will they add out value if they're involved? So you've got to remember, there's people we need to speak to, and there's going to be a need to be involved. And for those people that are actually doing us a favour or choosing to do extra work to help us. So you've got to think about that. It's not just about us going to them. We need them to help us sometimes. So that's going to affect how we contact them, what we might want to say. You might actually have what's going to be our angle to get their support. And one of the key things there is about thinking about contacting at the right time, not too early, and certainly don't leave it late. What format is our contact going to be when we communicate with them? Is it going to be email, electronic? Is it going to be a call? Is it a meeting? Depending how important they are. The people that are going to do it, the right person's got to be delivering that message, and they've got to have the right authority, and they've got to come at them through the right channel with the right amount of information. So you don't want to suddenly appear dumping loads of information on people. You've really got to think about a measured approach when you're planning your engagements. When you're engaging stakeholders, there's things that you want to say, and there's things that you want them to hear. Now, this image is fantastic for kind of mapping this together. So on the left-hand side, we have the source, what's in your head when you want to say something to somebody. As the message comes out, you're encoding it in a way that makes sense to you. Then there's the kind of black and white message, but then there's the receiver's encoding of that message, or decoding, because they're taking it apart and thinking about what you've said. And then there's the reception into their head. And you think about lots of things politicians say. It's quite often about what they don't say in a message that's more important, because around every piece of communication there's noise. Now, there's some research that says a human processes, particularly in the social media world and all that kind of stuff nowadays, something like 40,000 pieces of information a day. So you've got to get your one piece of information through to that person. So you need to plan it, okay? And it's complex. They might hear your message, but they might not understand it to the level they needed, all that kind of stuff. So this doesn't happen without planning. So when we're thinking about it, let's think of some good old SMART objectives, yeah? Making sure we know where we're going to engage an individual or a group and what we want to get out of it. Using the stakeholder analysis, have we got it right? Are they responding the way that we thought they would? And we should be tracking their responses as well. And that we've got clear, consistent messages. You might have, in a program, you have the vision statement. Vision statement may be relatively bland, and it needs to be customized for each client. Maybe if you're in a project, the project objectives would need to be customized so that different groups understand, and that we need to use effective channels, the ones that get to them with the minimum disruption, the minimum amount of noise, and how are we going to handle feedback. Now, when we're thinking about delivering messages, we need to think about It's an acronym called AIDA. We need to understand where they are. So we can take there's 4 steps. So there's awareness, interest, desire or commitment, and action. And we need to think about which one they are at when we're delivering the message. So there's no point in trying to get them to commit to something if they're not aware. So you have to take every communications with all stakeholders on that journey. You make them aware, you gain their interest, you get some desire or willingness to engage, and then you get their commitment. Something really important. It's the AIDA model when you're delivering communications, to make sure you're pitching it at the right moment in the right way. And then review and measuring effectiveness. So how can we do that? So here's always the question. If you're getting lots of negativity thrown at the program or in your feedback and everybody's against you, is that because you're communicating ineffectively, or actually are you communicating very effectively because you're generating interest? The fact that they don't support you is not necessarily your fault, but it does help you understand that you need to work at this. So levels of understanding, do people get it? Are they supporting you? Are their responses different to what you expect? Did you expect lots of resistance, but everybody's supporting you? Have they misunderstood what's happened? We can think about effectiveness of channels. Email works, social media works, meetings. Do they turn up for workshops? That kind of stuff. And you can then plan improvements around it. And check out your strategy, because as you're going through it, it may well be that you choose to update your strategy. Yeah, that you've got it wrong. It's there's nothing wrong with getting it wrong. It's about what you do when you find it's wrong. Okay, so that's how we deal with measuring effectiveness. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found that interesting and it's kind of whetted your appetite for the rest of the course. I'm sure you'll find lots more detail about each element in the e-learning module.